into this story here about RFK Jr. For those who are not aware, he has not actually officially announced yet. Now, I knew that he was running because a friend of mine sent me the FEC filing information, which said that he had filed the paperwork. That's how I found out about it. And I reported on that. I think it was last week, the first time I mentioned it, and I mentioned it on RBN. Now, as you can imagine, people have a lot to say about this. He's been smeared heavily by mainstream media, as one would predict. He is challenging a sitting Democrat president. He is running through the Democratic Party. And also because he is, he was against the mandates. He was against the jab. So he's getting heavy criticism there, which we predicted. But recent polls show that RFK Jr. is actually already polling double digits, and he has not even formally announced yet. I want to get into this clip here. We're going to show two different versions of this. I'm going to show this clip here from Case Study QB. Shout out to Case. Now, this is how Fox News is discussing RFK Jr.'s run. Let's get into this.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of Bobby Kennedy and nephew of JFK, has just declared he's running for president and will primary Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee. RFK Jr. wants to pick up where his family left off.
The easiest thing for a politician to do is to appeal to our greed, to our anger, to our fear. And what my father tried to do is much more complicated, but you can do it, which is to make people feel that they're part of a community and that they're on a heroic journey to do something that is going to be great, that's going to be historical. People respond to that kind of vision. I saw it happen to my father, and we can do it again in this country.
So RFK Jr. has a vision. I mean, at least he has one. Biden has none.
His father is Bobby Kennedy, for those who are not aware. So Robert Kennedy is his dad. JFK was his uncle.
RFK Jr.'s lane is on the populist left. Unlike Biden, he's against the deep state, obviously, because of what happened to his dad and uncle. Anti-censorship. Remember, the Biden White House censored him over vaccines. He's riding a hot anti-corporate streak, especially against big pharma and big tech.
You see, the assault on not only on the poor in our country, but there was a $3.8 trillion shift in wealth from the middle class and the poor to this new aristocracy of billionaires, a lot of them from Silicon Valley, who own the companies that were the biggest beneficiaries. And they were the ones who were censoring criticism of the lockdowns that were making them rich. So if you're outside of this system and you're looking in, it looks crooked.
So he's got a little Bernie bro in him, but he can get traction with the populist right too, you know?
He has a little bit of Bernie bro in him, but I think he goes a little bit further than Bernie Sanders. That's the thing about him. He does openly call out the government agencies because of what happened. That is 100% true, Dwayne. He is not a sellout like Bernie. The CIA killed his dad and his uncle, and he accused them of it publicly. Yes, he did accuse them of it publicly. That is one of the differences. I will say he doesn't hold back when it comes to that because he was personally affected by that. Let's go on. There's more.
Before COVID, his brand was being an environmentalist, but he appeals to conservationists as well. He has a connection to Black America and Hollywood. You know, his wife, Cheryl Hines, she's the co-star of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he has universal name ID, so he'll be able to raise some cash. And donors right now are looking for anybody but Joe Biden. His polls are in the gutter.
The numbers are beyond sobering for President Biden. They tell us many, or in some cases most of you, have deep doubts about his performance and about the direction of the country right now.
We asked the American people if he deserves re-election, if he deserves a second term. 32%, just a third of Americans in this poll, John, say yes. When we asked that back in December, it was up at 37%.
So how's Biden going to play this thing out? The Kennedy family has a history of disruption, and the Kennedys are everything the Bidens wanted to be. Biden wanted to be a Kennedy so bad that he plagiarized them.
You cannot measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the joy of their play.
Of course he plagiarized this. Joe Biden wasn't smart enough to write this speech. Come on, guys. This was 1987. Joe Biden, you think Joe Biden wrote this speech? He got this from Bobby Kennedy. Listen.
National product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play.
Our generation of Americans will pay any price, bear any burden, accept any challenge, and meet any hardship.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship.
So
He's been stealing from people for years. For years.
is Biden going to plagiarize, hide, drop out, run? We have no idea. The DNC will probably rig it so there won't be a debate. And it's going to be tough for RFK Jr. to get on TV because Big Pharma pays the bills. But he is a Kennedy, and anything could happen. Let's bring in Dana Perino, my co-host on The Five and co-anchor.
Okay. So, yes. Are they going to try to find a way to rig it? Absolutely. Is mainstream media, for the most part, going to try to ignore him as much as they can? Absolutely. They're already smearing him. And like I said, he is not officially announced, but he is already at double digits in the polls. I want to show you two clips from Rising that we're going to break down. One is from this morning, and the other one is from yesterday, I believe. Let's get started with this one first. I want to make sure I got the right one because, oh, this isn't, okay. Yeah, that is third. No, wait a minute. 1 second. I just want to make sure I'm going to the right one because I have two clips. Yes, I am going to the right one. All right, let's get started with this one first. Yes, let's get started with the one that came out this morning first. I was going to do the other way around and change my mind. So they've talked about this twice on Rising already. Listen to what Bree says in reference to how the media is treating RFK Jr. And they're doing this to Marianne Williamson too, but how the media is treating him. The difference is he hasn't even formally announced yet. Listen to this.
What's on your radar, Brianna?
Well, Robbie, even in advance of his official campaign kickoff, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is already polling at 10% in the Democratic primary race.
10%. Now, I know that may not sound like a lot, but remember, he hasn't even announced yet. Now, Marianne was polling at 10%. I believe it was like a week and a half ago. She's now down to 4%. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is polling at 10%. Honestly, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I don't even think those numbers are correct. We'll go on and I'll explain to you why I believe that to be so.
Starting off in a better position than Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, or Pete Buttigieg ever did in 2020. But despite this clear advantage, the mainstream media seems disinterested in understanding why so many Americans are open to his campaign or to the campaign of Marianne Williamson, who has surpassed pundit expectations by polling at 4% and who is winning the digital race with an incredibly successful TikTok campaign.
I don't even believe that this is something I want to tell you about these polls where it says Biden at 70%. I don't believe Biden is at 70%. I don't believe that number. I really don't. I think I've told you guys this before. I think they're inflating Biden's number. I think his his approval rating is actually lower than what mainstream media is saying that it is. But this is coming from Polling USA. And then there's a margin of error that you have to take into consideration as well. And it seems like it was like, 827 people that did this poll. I do not believe that Joe Biden's polling or people want him at 70%. I really don't believe that. Let's go on.
Certainly, both candidates benefit from widespread frustration with the Biden administration. Only 37% of Democrats want Biden to seek a second term, with a majority saying, actually, I'd like to get off this ride. And perhaps that's unsurprising given that most Democrats in 2020 indicated that their vote for Biden was more of a vote against Trump than an endorsement of Biden's specific brand of politics. And time has not improved Biden's prospects. Biden will be 81 in 2024, and 68% of voters say his age is a concern, including 48% of Democrats. And while concerns that Trump would mishandle the COVID pandemic led many in 2020 to suck it up and vote for the alleged adult in the room, Biden now has to stand by his record of COVID policies, which have angered the far left, who are furious that COVID-era policies like the Medicaid continuous enrollment provision have now ended, thrusting 15 million people off of Medicaid, as well as voters across the political spectrum who feel like the CDC was slow to correct policies that failed to acknowledge, say, natural immunity, and which shut down schools and businesses for too long, in their view. Instead of acknowledging his mistakes, Biden has waged a war against so-called dis or misinformation, making contrary opinions on COVID verboten in the virtual public square. And while conservatives seem keen to ban TikTok, Biden is set to recruit an army of TikTok influencers to help boost his chances in the election. Now, I would recommend that.
Now, that's very funny considering the U.S. government wants to actually ban TikTok altogether. And then you have the U.S. president wanting to hire TikTok influencers to help his campaign. This is just another sign that the president is not on the same page with the Democratic congressmen and congresswomen. I mean, you have a Congress here that was actively trying to ban TikTok in the United States. And then you got the president here saying, let me hire these TikTok influencers to help my reelection campaign. That is not on the same page at all. This is just really weird, really weird. I want to fast forward to this piece here when she gets into the discussion about the media. So here we go.
He did in 2020. But does that approach hold up when the basement is obviously a choice rather than a COVID era requirement? Now, it's still early, but polls show Biden losing to both Trump and DeSantis.
Polls show Joe Biden losing to Trump and DeSantis. DeSantis hasn't even announced that he's running. Let's get to the media part.
Now, despite this clear appetite for anyone else in the Democratic primary, the mainstream media channels have shown no curiosity about the other options in the race. Yep. Perhaps it's expected that news networks staffed by former administration officials and administrations staffed by former MSNBC journalists would circle the wagons around the establishment choice, but it's still disappointing. Luckily, some of us in independent media are happy to tell you what the candidates are all about.
So this piece right here, notice how people who were mouthpieces for the State Department or worked for the State Department or the White House in any way, shape, or form, notice how they leave those positions and then they become media talking heads for the State Department. This is all on purpose. When you have someone like Jen Psaki, who was the press secretary, she steps down. She didn't have that job long at all. She steps down and now she has a show on MSNBC. When you had someone like Simone Sanders, who also had worked on the Biden campaign, she was not chosen for Biden's press secretary. She gets a job on MSNBC. These people are put there on purpose to constantly feed you propaganda from the State Department. This is how it works. Now, I would argue, I don't think people that have been press secretaries, people that have worked for the White House, people that have been former politicians or are politicians, I don't think they should have those roles because in my opinion, that is a conflict of interest. Because if you worked on Biden's campaign or if you were Biden's press secretary, obviously, if you're on mainstream media, you are going to speak in such a way that is going to be favorable to Joe Biden. It is going to be unlikely that you, Jen Psaki, are going to cover a story like the Hunter Biden laptop story fairly, because again, you are coming from that administration. But they put these people into these positions to manufacture consent and to protect and keep the status quo.
You can make up your own mind about your vote. Now, in a recent piece in The Nation, veteran journalist John Nichols wrote a well-researched piece into RFK Jr.'s electoral strategy. According to Nichols, RFK Jr. is betting the house on New Hampshire, hoping that the Kennedy name still packs some punch in New England, where his uncle JFK won the state in the party's nomination back in 1960. RFK Jr. is hoping to capitalize not just on his name, but on the fact that New Hampshire residents are bristling over the DNC's decision to rig the primary order, stripping the Granite State of its first-in-the-nation status. Notably, Marianne has made a similar case. I interviewed her New Hampshire state director on Bad Faith podcast last week if you'd like to know more about her plan to beat out the establishment Dems in that state. Now, when the DNC changed the primary order to prioritize Biden's stronghold, South Carolina, Kennedy wrote an op-ed for New Hampshire's largest newspaper objecting to the switch and positioning himself as a lifelong Democrat from a family of Democrats in lifelong service. Some local politicians saw the move as cynical, but it could be a savvy one. Unlike so many so-called journalists who cover RFK Jr. exclusively as a vaccine skeptic, of course they cover him at all, Nichols detailed the candidate's appearance last month at St. Anselm College Forum in Manchester, New Hampshire, where Nichols explains, quote, prospective presidential contenders often test the waters. Nichols says Kennedy positioned himself as a Democrat who would run as a champion of the environment, an advocate for working class families, and a critic of corporate power.
Let's jump in here for just a second. I want to add something about the South Carolina primary race. Notice she said that he openly, spoke out about that. He wrote an op-ed about that. He's very vocal about it. New Hampshire is an interesting place. Let's talk about New Hampshire. Since I live in New England, that's my neighbor to the north. New Hampshire can be tricky. Because unlike Massachusetts, where you just kind of know you come here as a Democrat, you pretty much just got it, right? New Hampshire is different. And when you go to New Hampshire, you get a mixed bag. There's strong libertarians there. There's Republicans in New Hampshire. There's Democrats in New Hampshire, but there's also independents in New Hampshire. Now, one thing I will say is New Hampshire has this motto called live free or die. And they really mean that. They don't really feel like it's their place to impose on your freedoms. And so if you have someone like RFK Jr. come to New Hampshire and speak to people there about the issues that he had with the mandates, about the issues that he had with the jabs, about the issues of this authoritarian-like state that we've had on this country since the pandemic, he can actually win over a significant amount of people in New Hampshire, I would say. They're not big on having a lot of rules. I'm just going to tell you, New Hampshire is a different place. So I could see him doing well in a place like New Hampshire. I am not sure he will do well in South Carolina for the same reason I'm not sure that Marianne Williamson will do well in South Carolina. And that, unfortunately, is the Obama Jim Clyburn effect. People in South Carolina like Joe Biden because of two reasons. Number one, he was Obama's VP. And number two, he has the Jim Clyburn support. And for whatever crazy reason, maybe it's because he has that fish fry, a lot of people in South Carolina love Jim Clyburn. You have to go there for yourself to see it. I'm just keeping it real. Okay. So I think both of them will struggle in a state like South Carolina. And I told you it's on purpose that they switched these states and they made South Carolina that first state. Now, we're going to switch to the second video. And this was the piece, I believe, that aired on Rising yesterday morning. Now, they brought on a gentleman here. He hosts a podcast. I'm sorry, he cracks me up. This guy cracks me up because he obviously is not for this. He's not for Joe Biden having a challenger. He may not say that, so to speak, but it comes across in his voice and things that he does say. But he's not for it. I've told you before that I think someone like RFK should run as an independent. I think that he would get a lot of support from independents if he ran as one, but also that would be a bigger threat to the deep state, right? And I think that by running in the Democratic Party, the DNC is going to stick their hooves into him and they are going to try to smear him even more. But even if they have to rig it, they will do that as well. Nico House will be here tomorrow to talk about the DNC fraud lawsuit, because I want to remind you guys how all this happened before. We've been here before. This is why I don't think any of them should run as a Democrat or Republican, right? But listen to what this gentleman says. I have a couple of things to say. I'm going to chime in here and there. Listen to this.
Well, you mentioned that it doesn't seem to help on the left side of the aisle when candidates are not from a political background and are independent. Yet it does seem to be behooving both Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who are polling at significantly high rates, much higher even than Bernie Sanders was polling at this time in 2016. And of course, he went on to win 20-odd states in the primary contest, despite having a complete blackout from the media and the Democratic Party very openly campaigning against him. So to people who look at these polls and say Marianne is at 4%, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who hasn't even technically made an official announcement yet, is at 10%. And with, what is it, 70-odd% of Americans not wanting Joe Biden to run again.
Let me pause there for just a second, because I do need to make an announcement in reference to RFK Jr.'s announcement. Next Wednesday, RFK Jr. will be making his official presidential announcement here in Boston. I am going to be there. I've already signed up to attend that event so I can cover it on the ground. So that'll be Wednesday morning. Doors open at 10 a.m. You do have to sign up in order to go. So Eric and I are going to be there. I'm going to try to see if I'm trying to see right now if I can get a press pass so I can get in a little bit earlier and set up, because it is standing room only. It's at the Boston Park Plaza. So that will happen next Wednesday morning. So I will be there to try to cover that, you guys. So just wanted to add that in there if you're wondering when he was going to make that announcement.
Do those polls not strike you as indicative of the fact that whatever trend might exist among Democrats preferring establishment candidates, something different is happening this time this year?
Nope, not at all. And the reason being that, again, you have to look at the history. You got to always look at the history. So when Donald Trump was getting ready to ramp up his campaign in 2019, I personally did a poll in which we asked people about whether Trump should run for president. When we asked Republicans that, and a lot of Republicans said Donald Trump should not run for president. So there's this in politics overwhelmingly now, because both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are very professionalized in terms of having multiple consultant classes that literally make their money entirely off of elections. They are operating under their voters are operating under what's called negative partisanship. So in other words, like, people may not like Joe Biden very much, but they're still going to vote for him. In
this part right here, let me pause. If you haven't had a chance to do so, guys, please go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me with the algo. Let's talk about this piece here where he mentions you have to look at the history. Let's talk about the history, right? He just told you that people may not like Joe Biden, but they're still going to vote for him. But if we look at the history, and he brings up that Bernie Sanders run during the era, 2016 election, the history shows us that people did not like Hillary Clinton, and people did not vote for Hillary Clinton. Remember that? History shows us that people chose Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. Even though Bernie, get this, let's walk back. Even though Bernie did not get the nomination, that still didn't push people to vote for Hillary Clinton. We always have to remember that when people say, go look back at the history. Keep that in mind. Then, if we want to jump forward to 2020, Biden won in 2020. But again, that was not so much we like Joe Biden, we want to vote for Joe Biden. It was more so We just don't want Trump again. And even then, it's not like Joe Biden like wiped the floor with Donald Trump. Donald Trump still got a lot of votes. So we have to keep this in mind. And I still argue till this day, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I think Trump would have won again. I still argue that. I still stand by that. So when he says, look at the history, just remember what the history showed us in 2016.
Same way that Donald Trump, his large percentage of the voters who vote for him don't like Donald Trump. They just don't like Joe Biden more. And so that's why they vote for him. So these polls tend to overstate support like that. And we know what the electorate thinks of Marianne Williamson already. Like, they've already seen her. She's been in a debate. And in fact, actually, when she only got in one debate, but Republicans started donating to her more than Democrats did after her.
Let's pause him right here. This piece that he said, I think is important because there's something I want to add to
this. But they're
this.
Still going to vote for him in the same way that Donald Trump, his large percentage of the voters who vote for him don't like Donald Trump. They just don't like Joe Biden more. And so that's why they vote for him. So these polls tend to overstate support like that. And we know.
He said the polls tend to overstate support like that. Why is it when it comes to people that are running under progressive policies, these media pundits will say that the polls are overstated, but you never hear them say that about the polls about Joe Biden, right? That 70% that I showed you in the previous video, I told you, I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe 70% of people want Joe Biden to run again or support Joe Biden again. I do not believe that for one freaking bit. But you won't hear them say that about the support for Biden. They'll only say the support is overstated in those polls for those candidates that are running under progressive issues. Why is that? Because they're running under policies for the people, because they're trying not to be connected to the status quo, so to speak. And when it comes to someone like RFK Jr., again, remember, this is someone who's criticizing the deep state, corporations, the military industrial complex, anti-war. He's anti-imperialist. He has the added features that Marianne does not have. Like when we talk to Marianne, we're really trying to get under this. Like, are you anti-war? Are you for these wars? Are you against these wars? Are you anti-imperialist? Are you for this? Are you against this? And we have never heard her come out and say that she's anti-war, she's anti-imperialist. In fact, she said we need to continue to support the people in Ukraine. She's moved a little bit on foreign policy, but it was very clear to me she's not anti-war, she's not anti-imperialist, and she wants Israel-Palestine two-state solution, which I also don't agree with. So those are added factors that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has that Marianne does not have. So when people say, oh, they're pretty much the same, they're not the same. They're not the same. And I'm telling you this, and this is why I say he should run as an independent, because he can appeal to people on different sides of the aisle, guys. He can appeal to people on the right who didn't like these damn mandates. And there were some people on the left who didn't like him too. He can appeal to independents who are like, all this shit is fucked up. All of it. I don't agree with any of it. He can appeal to people who are anti-war and anti-imperialist, whether they're on the left or the right. That's the difference. That's why I say he should run as an independent, because he does have those type of policies to have that type of coalition building across political ideologies.
We know what the electorate thinks of Marianne Williamson already. Like, they've already seen her. She's been in a debate. And in fact, actually, when she only got in one debate, but Republicans started donating to her more than Democrats did after her debate. So
Republicans also donated to Joe Biden as well. I'm sorry, I have to debunk this guy. Republicans also donated to Joe Biden's campaign as well. And Joe Biden, when he says that they know about Marianne Williamson, they've seen her before, they saw her on the debate stage. We saw Joe Biden on the debate stage 2 presidential election cycles. And then it was the third one when he came around and he won. So it's just funny, he's not going to mention that. He only wants to mention it when it's in reference to the candidates running on progressive issues.
She's a very different person than Bernie Sanders.
That strikes me as a really interesting argument Joe Biden, of course, who was president of the United States of America, ran for president 3 times and failed terrifically in his first run, was ousted by a plagiarism scandal, was really considered to be a political non-starter until Barack Obama made him a VP, gave him a little bit of legs, was so timid about his chances that he was talked out of running in 2016 at all. It didn't seem like he would be able potentially to even beat Hillary Clinton in the primary at the time. So given the fact that many candidates, many presidents have taken a couple bites of the apple to actually be successful, it does seem odd to specifically say that Marianne Williamson, because she has run again, doesn't stand any chance of running this time around. Of course, she was the most Googled person on the one time she was allowed on the debate stage. The rules changed to exclude her afterward. And other people who are very much considered to be strong political candidates, like the vice president, who has spoken of breathlessly about being Biden's heir by certain members of the Democratic Party, also had to drop out of the Democratic primary without winning a single vote, because in part, she was so humiliated by the fact that she was coming in behind Andrew Yang, a relative unknown, in her own state of California, a state which, of course, independent outsider candidate Bernie Sanders won overwhelmingly, both in 2016 and 2020. So I'm just really curious what you do with all of that information, not to mention Robert F. Kennedy Jr. polling so high when he hasn't even officially announced. You're just writing that off entirely.
Bree threw in a little bit of a fire there. You could hear it in her voice. She threw in a little bit of like, okay, what is this guy talking about? But it's true. It's true. Like I said, he hasn't even announced yet. Let's go on.
No, I'm not at all, because Marianne Williamson is nothing at all like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has a coherent set of policy recommendations. He has legislation that he has personally sponsored. He has coalition.
He hasn't done much research. Marianne has policies too. She has policies outlined as well. I'll let him go on though. This is just funny.
That he's built for decades. He has a record, miles long compared to Marianne Williamson. People know what they're getting, and when he started running and people started paying attention to him. A lot of people thought, hey, you know what? This guy actually has some good stuff. I'm gonna support him. Marianne Williamson, again, when she was in that one debate in the last time around, it was Republicans who were donating to her because they wanted to troll the Democrats.
He's still not going to tell you that Republicans also donated to Joe Biden. You see how this works?
And that is a fact, an absolute stone cold fact. Jeff Rowe, who ran Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential campaign, literally encouraged people on Twitter who are Republicans, please give money to this woman. We need to have her be in the next debate so we can make fun of the Democrats, because she's interesting. Because
Bree, I wish you would have had me there with you on this one, so I could tell this guy that Republicans also donated to Joe Biden as well.
When I was working on the Bernie Sanders campaign, we were very proud to have so many people across the political spectrum donating to our campaign. We saw that as an endorsement of broadly appealing policies and a broad working class coalition. I'm not sure a politician who balks at the idea of having people who are Republicans, who are going to be part of their constituency in a country that they plan to lead. The idea of turning your nose down at those donations seems to me not to be an especially wise political position, regardless if those donations are coming in bad faith. But what do you make of this, Robbie?
Well, let's turn to RFK for a moment. Obviously, this has been a person who's been vocal on the vaccine issues since like the beginning of time, even before vaccines were such a salient national political issue, given the realities of COVID. Certainly, I think there are more Republican primary voters who are really animated about that than Democratic primary voters, given the politicization of that issue. But is it possible that he can make a splash anyway, or generate more? He's someone who has generated media attention, media buzz over the years because of his name and because of his single focus on this issue. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think he has some basis of support being, if you look at that Morning Consult poll, his support among voters, let's say 55 and up, is quite a bit higher than compared to the other age groups. So that is, indicates some affinity with some people who kind of remember the old Camelot days. I hate that term, but nonetheless, there are some people who may have some residual fond memories of that and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to give that guy a chance. So he, and again, it's unclear what his policy positions would be because.
No, it's not. Oh, I wish I could have been there. Bree, we could have tag teamed him. Listen, it is not unclear what his policy positions will be. Anyone who's done their research has watched these interviews that have happened with RFK Jr. You know what his policy positions would be. I just laid them out here for you, but let's do it again. Number one, he's against these damn wars. Number two, he's against imperialism. He talks about this also on social media multiple times. Jimmy Dore has interviewed him multiple times. Kim Iverson has interviewed him. People have interviewed him multiple times where he's talked about these issues. Anti-war, anti-imperialist, against the deep state, against these government agencies. He's heavily criticized the CIA multiple times. Yes, he was against the mandates. He's also called out corporate greed and is against these corporations. He's also brought up the healthcare issue in this country. What do you mean he don't have no policies? What do you mean? And I don't even like the fact that he's running through the Democratic Party. I don't like it at all. I told you he should run as an independent. And if I get the chance to talk to him, I'm going to tell him you need to run as an independent. I stand by that. But for him to just sit up here and lie and say he doesn't really have any policies, did you do any research before you came on the show? Or did you do the research and you purposely left the information out because you also are manufacturing consent and you're also trying to help the Biden administration and keep Biden in office? Let me let him finish.
He hasn't really gotten into things yet. So we'll see what he can come up with. But I mean, running as an anti-vax person, that's not really going to get you anything.
Well, I will. That's not who said he was running. Is that? Do you see how they're already doing the smears? Did he say that? He hasn't even officially announced. That's why I'm gonna go stream this shit next Wednesday, so you can hear his speech from someone who does independent media. Because mainstream media is probably not going to let you hear the whole speech, or they're going to cut off part of the speech, or they're not going to do the speech at all, and they're going to twist it. So I want you to hear from me, independent media. This is crazy. Well, someone who's running he's just repeating the same talking points as CNN, MSNBC. This guy is following that status quo. You see what he's doing? I know he's a podcast host. I wouldn't be surprised if he's connected with the DNC in some way, shape, or form. I'm sorry. I don't trust it.
I'll say
even in the Republican Party, it doesn't necessarily get you anything either.
It does
gets
seem
you
to me
a bunch
that,
of subscribers, but that's not votes.
Yeah, I mean, you.
What does this have? What? He said it doesn't get you anything. It gets you subscribers, but not enough vote. Who the hell said he was looking for subscribers? I'm so confused. I just don't remember. Is Robert F. Kennedy out there asking for subscribers?
Have been voiced a very strong personal opinion about how you seem to think both of these candidates are in bad faith. It is also true, however, that I haven't looked as much. Robert Kennedy obviously is much newer in this race. Marianne Williamson does, in fact, have a policy platform. You don't have to like it or agree with it, but it is frustrating, I think, to many of her supporters, and I'm sure to many Robert F. Kennedy Jr. supporters, that the people who are very quick to be critical of them don't seem to have taken the time to familiarize themselves at all with their policy agenda. Marianne Williamson very closely maps on to much of the Bernie agenda, which is why she has appeal in that sector of the electorate. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. appeals not just on the basis of, I don't think he's running as an anti-vaxxer. I don't think that is necessarily a fair characterization, but he has been also one of the stronger voices in the anti-war movement. And certainly there is a broad appetite among American voters for a candidate who is willing to show some more restraint with international spending, military spending, particularly with respect to the war in Ukraine right now. So it'd be interesting to hear some substantive takes on whether or not those issues you think have any legs with the electorate, the same way that Bernie, who was in fact broadly unknown with the public in 2015. He was not a known quantity. Of course, he had been a senator for a long time, but most Americans had no name recognition of him at all. He was able to make a case for himself by making the case on this policy basis. And we'll see if both of these candidates are able to do the same. They certainly are ahead of where he was in polling at the time. Thank you so much for joining.
And he's gone. So just like that. So this is something that we need to point out. Like, he's polling ahead of where Bernie was at this point in time. But for this gentleman to come onto Rising and just blatantly lie and say that they don't have policies, look, whether I agree with their strategy or not, I'm not going to come onto a channel and blatantly lie and say, yeah, they don't have any policies. I don't think he's going to win votes just running on being like, anti-jab or whatever. Like, we haven't heard Robert F. Kennedy say that's what he's running on. He hasn't even made the damn announcement yet. So just come on to people's shows and just blatantly lie. Do you see the number of lies this guy just told? Anywho, I'm going to try to cover that announcement because I want you guys to hear it from independent media, because I'm not going to cut away from the speech like MSNBC would.